The weekend that changed everything. The lobby of the Greenwich Manor Hotel and Spa was an epitome of luxury, bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The warm lighting cast delicate shadows on the marble floor, and the faint sound of classical music added to the serene ambience. I held my 7-year-old daughter, Emma's tiny hand, trying to hide the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones. The week had been overwhelming, juggling my demanding job as a project manager in Manhattan while making sure Emma had everything she needed. But this weekend was supposed to be special. It was my mother's 65th birthday, and despite my reservations, I had agreed to the family gathering. Since losing my husband 2 years ago, family events had become complicated. I had always hoped they would be a source of comfort, but instead they only seemed to highlight how much things had changed. "Welcome to Greenwich Manor, Mrs. Miller," the receptionist greeted with a professional smile. I nodded politely, adjusting the collar of my navy blue suit. Despite the weekend getaway, I couldn't help but keep my business attire. It was like armor, a layer of confidence I needed around my family. "Mom, this hotel is so pretty. It's like Cinderella's castle," Emma chirped excitedly, her light blue summer dress twirling as she spun in a small circle. Her brown curls bounced with each movement, and for a brief moment, her joy made me smile. I squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, sweetheart. And Grandma's birthday party is going to be wonderful." At least, that was the plan. Family expectations and tension. We took the elevator to the 5th floor, heading towards the French restaurant, Le Jardin, where my mother had reserved a dinner table. As we entered, I saw them already seated: my mother, my older sister Patricia, and her daughter Jenny. My mother, elegant as always, sat at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored navy blue dress, a pearl necklace resting delicately on her collarbone. She had spent her life in Greenwich society, effortlessly navigating its unspoken rules. Beside her, my sister Patricia exuded the kind of effortless perfection that made people admire and resent her at the same time. Everything from her manicured nails to the designer bag resting beside her seat was curated for her image. "Elizabeth, Manhattan keeps you busy as ever. I see," my mother greeted me, sipping her wine with an air of practiced grace. I nodded, taking the seat across from them. "Yes, but work is fulfilling. Emma's doing great in school, and things are going smoothly." Patricia smirked, setting down her phone, the same one she had likely been using to update social media about our perfect family gathering. "I never see you post anything on social media. Why don't you share some family photos once in a while?" There it was, the not-so-subtle dig at my absence from the carefully curated world of online perfection. I smiled tightly. I prefer to focus on real moments. Jenny, my 12-year-old niece, sat quietly beside her mother, barely touching her plate. I noticed that she only truly smiled when she talked to Emma. "Jenny, sit up straight. You have your ballet recital tomorrow, and slouching ruins your posture," Patricia scolded sharply, making Jenny jolt upright. Emma's face twisted into a frown as she watched. She didn't like it when adults spoke to kids that way, but she remained silent. The night continued uneventfully, with forced pleasantries and carefully measured conversation. By 9 p.m., Emma and I had returned to our room, looking out over the quiet suburban night. Jenny looked sad today, Emma mumbled as she curled under the blankets. I sighed, tucking her in. "Yes, sweetheart." She did. There was something about Jenny's demeanor that left me unsettled. The way she shrank under Patricia's strict gaze, the way she avoided eye contact with my mother. But at the time, I brushed it off. I had no way of knowing that by morning, everything would change. The morning that unraveled it all. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. A feeling of unease lingered in my chest, but I couldn't quite place it. By 8 a.m., we were seated in the hotel's breakfast lounge, the Garden View. The buffet was a lavish display of Belgian waffles, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit platters, and smoked salmon. Patricia, as usual, was scrolling through her phone, likely updating her followers on her picture-perfect morning. My mother sat across from me, sipping her coffee, radiating quiet authority. Jenny, however, barely touched her food. "Good morning, Elizabeth. Emma looks adorable. Did you buy that dress in Manhattan?" My mother's voice was pleasant, but laced with subtle judgment. Patricia, never one to let a moment of attention pass, suddenly reached into her bag and pulled out a Cartier necklace case. "Oh, haven't I shown you yet?" She opened the case to reveal a 20-carat diamond necklace, glittering in the sunlight. "My husband gave this to me for our 10th anniversary. Everyone at the charity gala last week was so jealous." Emma's eyes widened. "Wow, it's so shiny. Can I touch it? It looks like a doll's necklace." Patricia hesitated, but then placed it in Emma's small hands. For a moment, Jenny's expression changed. Her hand clutched at the sleeve of her dress. I frowned. Something felt off. After breakfast, as we were preparing to return to our rooms, a piercing scream shattered the peaceful morning. Patricia's voice rang through the restaurant. "My necklace, my Cartier necklace is gone." The entire restaurant fell silent. Guests turned to look as Patricia frantically searched her purse. "It was just here. I left it on the table." A horrible twist of dread settled in my stomach as my mother's sharp gaze immediately turned to Emma. Emma touched it last. Patricia's voice was dangerously controlled, but the accusation was loud and clear. Emma froze beside me, her eyes filling with tears. "Wait, you think my daughter took it?" I snapped, stepping forward instinctively. My mother's tone was firm. "We're not accusing her, Elizabeth, but children don't always understand the value of things. Maybe she took it by accident." Emma shook her head frantically, her small hands clenching my sleeve. "I didn't. I only held it for a second. I put it back." "We should call the police," my mother said coldly. "This is a serious theft case." Emma's face went pale. Patricia knelt down in front of her, her voice dripping with feigned patience. "Emma, sweetie, if you took it, just tell us now. We won't be mad. But lying will only make things worse." My blood boiled. She said she didn't take it. Are you really accusing a 7-year-old? Patricia ignored me, her eyes locked on my daughter. Emma's lip trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't. Please believe me, Mom." I wrapped my arms around her protectively. "I do, baby. I believe you." But as I glanced across the room, I saw Jenny standing frozen in the corner. And I saw something else, a flicker of guilt in her expression. Jenny knew something. And I was going to find out what. Little did I know, the truth about the missing necklace would unravel more than just an accusation. It would reveal secrets no one was prepared for. The accusation that shook the family. The breakfast lounge of Greenwich Manor Hotel and Spa had gone deathly silent, save for the sharp sound of my sister Patricia's panicked breathing. The luxurious ambience of the place, the gleaming silverware, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and buttered croissants, and the serene murmur of classical music playing in the background, was now overshadowed by a heavy tension that wrapped itself around the table like a noose. I clutched Emma's small trembling hand in mine, feeling her fingers tighten with fear. She was just 7 years old, too young to understand the full gravity of the situation, but old enough to know that she was being accused of something terrible. "The necklace was right here," Patricia said, her voice rising an octave as she gestured wildly at the table. "I took it off for a second before heading to the restroom. Now, it's gone." The implication was clear. Emma had been the last one to touch it. My mother's gaze hardened as she turned toward my daughter, and though her tone was still controlled, the quiet authority she wielded made my blood boil. "Emma, sweetheart, if you saw anything or picked it up by accident, just tell us. We won't be angry, but it's very important that we find it." Emma shook her head so hard that her brown curls bounced, her wide, teary eyes darting between the adults surrounding her. I didn't take it. I swear, she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. Patricia let out a dramatic sigh, pinching the bridge of her nose. Elizabeth, can you please just check her pockets? Children don't always understand the value of these things. She probably thought it was a toy. The words landed like a slap across my face. Check her pockets, like she was a thief. Emma let out a small hiccuping sob and pressed herself against me, as if she wanted to disappear. I could feel her tiny heartbeat racing against my arm. My mother nodded stiffly, her pearl necklace catching the soft morning light as she clasped her hands together. Elizabeth, I know this is difficult, but Patricia has a right to be upset. That necklace is worth a fortune, and we need to clear this up immediately. If Emma didn't take it, then we'll know to start looking elsewhere. So now it was my responsibility to prove my daughter's innocence. The thought made my stomach churn. I bent down, brushing Emma's damp cheek with my fingers. Emma, sweetheart, do you want to show them your pockets so we can put an end to this nonsense? Her lip wobbled as she nodded hesitantly. With slow, uncertain hands, she reached into the pockets of her little blue summer dress and turned them inside out. Nothing. They were completely empty. A beat of silence followed. I turned back to my family, my voice cold as steel. Well, do you believe her now? But before anyone could respond, Patricia gasped dramatically, clutching her chest as if she were about to faint. My God, what if she hid it somewhere else? What if she ran off and tucked it away? What if? I snapped. Enough. I slammed my hand down on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. The entire restaurant turned to stare. Emma let out a startled whimper, and Jenny, my 12-year-old niece, flinched hard in her seat. It wasn't just from the sudden noise. It was guilt. I saw it. Her hands clenched the hem of her pink dress, knuckles white, eyes darting toward the exit like she wanted to escape. She was practically shaking. And suddenly, it all clicked. Jenny knew something. Maybe she had seen where the necklace went. Maybe she had it. And yet she wasn't saying a word. I softened my voice, forcing the fire in my veins to cool for Emma's sake. Emma didn't take it. This conversation is over. We should be looking elsewhere instead of harassing a child. But Patricia wasn't done. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. If no one here wants to be reasonable, then I'll be left with no choice but to call security. We can review the cameras. And if they find anything. Jenny snapped her head up, her face turning pale. No, she blurted out so suddenly that everyone turned to look at her. A terrible silence fell over the table. Patricia's eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? No. Jenny's breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked like she might burst into tears. Her eyes flickered to Emma, then to the ground. I saw it, the shame in her expression, the way she kept twisting the fabric of her dress. I kept my voice gentle. Jenny, sweetheart, if you know something, now's the time to say it. No one is mad at you. But my mother and Patricia weren't as patient. Patricia narrowed her perfectly lined eyes, her voice laced with warning. Jenny, do not play games right now. This is serious. If you know something, tell me immediately. Jenny visibly shrank under her mother's gaze. I could almost hear the battle in her mind. The fear of disappointing her mother, the shame of being caught in a situation she hadn't planned for. Finally, she sucked in a shaky breath and stood up. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the Cartier necklace. The gasps around the table were deafening. Patricia's face drained of color. My mother's lips parted in shock. Emma just stood there frozen, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Patricia's voice came out in a whisper. Jenny, what? What have you done? Jenny's chin wobbled, her eyes welling up. I didn't mean to steal it. I swear. She hiccuped through her sobs. I just wanted to see how it looked on me. I was going to put it back, but then Mom started yelling. And I got scared. A long, agonizing silence followed. Patricia's eyes darkened, her expression unreadable. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made me accuse your cousin. I had the hotel security on alert. Do you understand how serious this is?" Her voice shook with rage, but not because she was concerned about Jenny's actions. No, it was because she was embarrassed. Because she had made a scene, accused my daughter publicly, and now she looked like a fool. Jenny's face crumpled as she looked down, waiting for her mother's wrath. I felt my heart break for her. I stepped in before Patricia could speak again. "Enough." My voice was firm but calm. "She made a mistake, and she's already terrified. Let's not make it worse." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't done. "Emma deserves an apology." Patricia's expression hardened. "Elizabeth, don't be ridiculous. She's a child. She doesn't understand. Neither does Emma." My tone left no room for debate. "And yet you had no problem humiliating her. You owe her an apology." Now, Patricia's jaw clenched, but before she could say anything, Jenny wiped at her teary face and turned to Emma. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I should have told the truth sooner. I was scared. I hope you can forgive me." Emma looked up at me, unsure of what to do. I gave her a reassuring squeeze, and after a moment, she nodded. Patricia, however, remained silent. But I knew one thing for certain. This family dynamic had just changed forever, and it would never be the same again. The rift that couldn't be ignored. The weight of the truth hung in the air like a storm cloud, pressing down on everyone at the breakfast table. The once elegant, lively atmosphere of Greenwich Manor's luxury restaurant had been replaced by a cold, suffocating tension. Emma, my 7-year-old daughter, was visibly shaken, her small hands still gripping the hem of her dress, eyes darting around, unsure if the worst was over. She had been wrongly accused, and though the truth was now out, the damage had been done. And Patricia? She sat frozen, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the tablecloth, her expression unreadable. I could see the battle waging inside her, the fierce pride that refused to let her admit she was wrong, and the humiliating reality that she had accused her own niece of theft, when, in fact, it was her daughter who had taken the necklace. But instead of apologizing, Patricia did something I didn't expect. She sighed dramatically, shook her head, and crossed her arms. "Well, I suppose that's settled, then," she muttered, her voice clipped, dismissive, as if all of this had been a minor inconvenience instead of an emotional nightmare for my child. I felt my blood boil. "Settled." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Patricia, is that really all you have to say? You falsely accused my daughter, humiliated her, and called security over nothing. She deserves an apology." Emma's lower lip quivered, but she held my hand tightly, her little fingers clenching mine in silent support. Patricia finally looked at Emma, but her expression was void of any real remorse. "It was a misunderstanding, sweetheart," she said, as if that would somehow erase the memory of being publicly humiliated. Emma just stared at her, confused and hurt. That's when Jenny, her own daughter, spoke up. "Mom, just say you're sorry," she said softly, her eyes still damp from tears. "You scared Emma. You scared me too." Patricia's jaw tightened. I could see the internal struggle, the part of her that knew she was wrong, but the other part of her that would rather walk on glass than admit it. Instead of addressing Jenny's plea, she turned to my mother, looking for support. "Mom, you see what's happening here," she scoffed, flipping her perfectly curled hair over her shoulder. "Elizabeth is making a spectacle out of this. It was just a misunderstanding. Why is she making it such a big deal?" My mother, who had been eerily quiet throughout the entire ordeal, finally set her coffee cup down with a soft clink. And what she said next stunned everyone. "You should apologize, Patricia." Patricia's head snapped toward her, eyes wide. "Excuse me." Mother simply folded her hands together. "You falsely accused a child you're supposed to love as your own niece, And now, instead of apologizing, you're trying to dismiss it like it was nothing. You raised a scene in front of all these people, Patricia. You made it a big deal, not Elizabeth." Patricia's face flushed red with anger. I could tell she had not expected this. My mother had always favored Patricia, the perfect daughter who married wealthy, had the picture-perfect suburban life, and fit neatly into the elite circles of Greenwich society. Meanwhile, I had been the one who strayed. The independent one, the single mother, the workaholic who didn't rely on a man to support her. So for my mother to side with me, publicly, no less, was a shock. Patricia let out a bitter laugh. "This is unbelievable. First, my daughter makes a mistake, and now suddenly I'm the villain." She pointed at me. "This is exactly why no one wants to be around you, Elizabeth. You're always so self-righteous, always acting like you're better than everyone else. Maybe if you weren't such a controlling, uptight workaholic, you'd actually have a husband still." That was it. I didn't even realize I had stood up until I felt the entire table staring at me in stunned silence. My voice was calm, but firm. "This isn't about me, Patricia. This is about your refusal to take responsibility for hurting a child. My child. And frankly, if this is the kind of person you've become, then maybe it's a good thing I don't spend time around you." Her nostrils flared. "Oh, so now you're cutting me out of your life over a necklace?" "No, I'm cutting you out of my life because you refuse to be accountable for your actions." I placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "And I won't have my daughter growing up thinking it's okay to accept mistreatment from the people who are supposed to love her." A long, deafening silence followed. Even my mother looked taken aback by my words. Jenny, however, broke the silence by standing up as well. With tears still clinging to her lashes, she turned to me and Emma. "I really am sorry, Emma." She looked at her mother, then back at me. "I don't want to be like her." Patricia's face drained of color. Jenny shook her head. "No, Mom. I don't want to learn that it's okay to lie, or to let someone else take the blame for something I did. And I definitely don't want to grow up thinking that saying I'm sorry makes me weak." She turned back to Emma. "I'm really, really sorry. Can we still be friends?" Emma looked up at me, then at Jenny, and slowly nodded. "Okay." Patricia looked completely shattered, but I had no sympathy left to give her. I turned to my mother, whose face held an expression of quiet disappointment. "Mom, I hope you see now why Patricia and I will never be the same." Mother exhaled, her shoulders dropping as if the weight of decades of favoritism had just hit her all at once. "I do, Elizabeth, and I'm sorry. For all of it." Patricia scoffed. "So that's it. You're all against me now." I simply shook my head. "No, Patricia, you put yourself here." I took Emma's hand. "We're done here." And with that, I walked away, leaving Patricia to sit in the wreckage of her own arrogance. But as I glanced down at Emma, who held her head high despite everything she had been through, I knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of something new, something better, and I would never let her doubt her worth again. The truth that changed everything. The days following the disastrous morning at the Greenwich Manor were eerily quiet. There were no passive-aggressive text messages from Patricia, no cryptic calls from my mother trying to smooth things over. It was as if everyone was still absorbing the impact of what had happened, the lies, the accusations, and most of all, the truth that no one could ignore anymore. But for me, the silence was a relief. Emma was still a little shaken, but the bright light in her eyes hadn't dimmed. In fact, if anything, she seemed stronger, more confident in the knowledge that she had done nothing wrong, and that I had been there to protect her. And that meant everything. But there was one loose end left to tie, and I had no idea if I was ready to face it. An unexpected visit. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I heard the knock at my door. Emma was upstairs, playing with her dolls, so I assumed it was a delivery or maybe a neighbor. But when I opened the door, I froze in place. It was my mother. She stood there, looking small, a far cry from the polished, untouchable woman I had known my whole life. The rain had dampened the edges of her perfectly styled hair, and she clutched her designer coat as if trying to shield herself from something more than just the cold. "Elizabeth," she said softly, her voice carrying an uncertainty I wasn't used to. "May I come in?" For a moment, I considered telling her no. For years, I had tried to earn my mother's approval, to be the daughter she wanted, the woman she respected. And for just as many years, I had come up short. But something about the way she looked at me now. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't disappointment. It was regret. I sighed and stepped aside. "Come in." She walked into my home as if she had never truly seen it before. Her eyes wandered over the cozy living room, the small but inviting space I had created for Emma and myself, a space filled with warmth, love, and the quiet resilience of a mother raising her daughter on her own. She sat down on the couch, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles in her skirt. I waited. And then, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, she said, "I was wrong." A mother's realization. The words shook me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my mother to admit she was wrong. About me, about Patricia, about everything. And now, sitting across from me, she looked defeated. I spent so many years telling myself I was raising you girls equally," she murmured, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "That I wasn't favoring Patricia. That I was simply supporting her because she needed it more. But I see now that I was blind." She looked up at me then, her eyes wet, but unwavering. "I let her believe she could do no wrong," she admitted. "And in doing that, I made you feel like you could never do anything right." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I didn't speak. "Not yet. I saw how she treated you that day," she continued. "I saw how she looked at Emma. And for the first time, I understood. I understood that I had allowed it, that I had let it go on for far too long." I swallowed hard. "And what about Emma?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You accuse her too, Mom. You looked at her like she was guilty before she even had a chance to defend herself." She closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. "I did," she admitted, "and I hate myself for it. Because when I saw her standing there, crying, terrified, I wasn't seeing my granddaughter. I was seeing a mistake I didn't want to deal with." Her voice cracked. "But she's not a mistake, Elizabeth. She's a child. A wonderful, innocent child. And She took a shaky breath. "I don't deserve her forgiveness, or yours." For the first time in my life, my mother was sitting in front of me, owning her mistakes. Not making excuses, not shifting the blame. Just telling the truth. And I had no idea what to do with that. The power of forgiveness. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. "Mom," I hesitated. "I don't know if I can just forget everything. All the times you made me feel like I wasn't good enough. All the times you made me doubt myself." She nodded. "I don't expect you to." Silence stretched between us for a long moment. And then, from upstairs, a small voice called out, "Mom." Emma's footsteps padded softly as she came down the stairs, still in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. She rubbed her eyes sleepily, then stopped when she saw my mother sitting there. She hesitated, looking between us. My mother's gaze softened. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently. I owe you an apology." Emma tilted her head slightly, her innocent blue eyes wide. "I made a terrible mistake," my mother continued, voice trembling. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you. And I am so sorry." Emma's face crinkled in thought. Then, after a moment, she walked up to my mother and did something that completely shattered me. She reached out and took her hand. "It's okay," she said simply. And just like that, she forgave her. I had spent my whole life waiting for my mother to admit she was wrong, to see me, to choose me. But my daughter, she forgave in a heartbeat. Not because she didn't understand what had happened, not because she had forgotten, but because she was better than all of us. Moving forward. As the days passed, things didn't magically fix themselves. Patricia still refused to acknowledge what she had done, and though my mother tried to mend things with her, it was clear that the cracks would never fully heal. But something had changed between my mother and me. For the first time, she wasn't just my mother. She was a woman trying to undo the mistakes of the past. And while I wasn't sure where that would lead, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't raising my daughter to seek validation from the people who should have given it freely. I was raising her to know her worth. And that was the greatest lesson of all. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.